Well, good morning, brethren from West Wilmington. This quarter, we are dealing with education, and as it would be, this week, it's the family. So I decided in doing the Sabbath school lesson to bring my whole family, and let's talk about the family as a unit of education. So we have here Cynthia, my lovely wife. We all know Cynthia, teaches at the academy. We have Kezia, her own business woman, and also has taught at West Wilmington and at Sharon Temple as well. We have Stephen, who is at Yale, he's a psychiatrist there, and Sarah, who is still studying and is about to be a mother in just a couple short weeks. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about here, she'll probably be learning about it as well. With that said, let me invite you to pray as we launch this week's lesson on the family as a unit of education. So Father, help that what we discuss here would be practical, biblical, and meaningful to all those who listen. In Jesus' name, amen. They'd also say that the home is the principal educational institute of society. In other words, it's the home where education starts. I want to launch off with that. Do you guys agree with that? How is it? Or if you don't agree, tell me why you don't agree. That the home is the principal educational institution of society.
I would say that I do agree and disagree. I think initially it was meant to be that way, but because now times have kind of changed, and so a lot of children are spending more time in daycare facilities or with babysitters, and so most of their days is spent not actually with their parents at home. I would say that there are now more influences that probably have equal or stronger effect on the child in terms of education.
So you're kind of like between both poles. What do you think, Sarah? Is the home the main educational institution of society?
Well, today Daryl and I were discussing like parenting scenarios, like if our daughter does this, or are we gonna do this with our daughter? And he was like, well, education starts at home. Like he literally said those words just like 3 hours ago. And I agree. Like as far as sending your child to a Christian school or not, like that educating your child on things of God and spirituality and religion starts at home. Educating your child on compassion, empathy, kindness, sharing, caring, all I believe starts at home first. And then it's teachers and adults and other outside forces build on that, what they learn at home first.
Steve, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with everyone. I think that it also depends on how you define education, because I think if you think about education in the formal sense of like a curriculum and like the K through 12 and college and stuff, then the home is often not the principal site of education. But regardless of whether you're talking about that education or not, I think conditioning is definitely, the home is the first place in which one is conditioned, and you know how they're going to later respond. And part of that educational process is, you know, that conditioning. But I think, as Kezia was saying, like for most people today, where they've been formally, you know, where they formally get educated is outside of their home, even though the conditioning that they receive at home will play into like how they're formally educated.
So are you using the word conditioning as a synonym of education or as a subset of education?
I think education is a subset of conditioning. So the conditioning is, what are the things, rules you learn about, not just the explicit things, but the implicit things that no one teaches you, you know, with language, but they teach you by their behavior. They teach you by the things they don't say do. All those things are conditioning. And your formal education, you know, learning math, learning science, learning English, even learning the Bible, all of those things are part of that conditioning process. But the conditioning extends way beyond what happens in a formal education setting.
Okay.
I want to make, sorry, I just want to make a quick statement. I wasn't even necessarily even talking about formal education only, because for a lot of daycares, you can start taking your baby in at 6 weeks. So, you know, that kid will normally go into daycare at about 7:30 when the daycare opens, and then the parent picks them up around 5:30 or 6 o'clock. And then the next thing they do, they go home, they eat dinner, and then it's usually time for them to go to bed. So the people they're spending most of their day with are their daycare providers and the other kids. So even those conditioning things that Stephen was talking about, or even things like compassion and kindness and all of that, they're learning that either from the other children they're interacting with, or based on however their teachers behave. Some kids even call their teachers mom, because that's who they spend most time with.
So you're a daycare teacher, so you early childhood, so you tell us.
No, I agree with everything that has been said, although I think that the home should be the primary place where children learn and grow and should be guided. But as Kessia said, that is not happening today. And I know even in our childcare center, children come in at 7, and some of those children who come at 7, they leave at 6 in the evening.
11 hours basically.
Right, and so they spend most of the time with us. So whatever they are learning is, as Cassie said, from other children or from the teachers. What they see the teachers do and what other children do.
So in a sense, what we are saying is that ideally, the home should be this focal point of education or conditioning, but in our modern world, that is not happening.
Right.
Which makes me wonder then, when it comes to religious education, who trumps who? The church, the home, or Christian education in terms of teaching that child religious, spiritual mores and standards? Which one trumps which one in terms of the effectiveness and the usefulness of teaching these principles?
The home. Church and religious education, in my opinion.
The home first, then church, then like Christian school.
Yeah.
I think that, the home should be first in everything, because the parents are the ones who really know their children, right? And so everything should really be taught there, but that's not the case in today's world. That's not the case. So I guess wherever the religious instruction or spiritual instruction is being taught, that's where the child would get,
Right.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Mom said. I mean, the way it should be, it definitely should be home first. But if you're not having worship and stuff in your house, then with your children, and they're not, the only place they're learning about God is in Sabbath school, or if they're attending a Christian daycare or something, or a Christian school, then those things would have the most impact on them than the household.
How was with you guys? When you think about where you are religious speaking or where would you say you had the greatest impact? And don't say because your mom and I here, but where would you say you got the greatest impact of your religious sense or spiritual sense? Was it at Christian school which you went to, the church which you've attended all your lives, or would you say it was home?
Definitely home for me.
Sarah?
Home as well, definitely, because as I tell everybody, you taught us religious application as well as worldly application. And I feel that's so important, especially in today's age. Like, in my opinion, I don't think you could tell a child just don't drink because the Bible says so. You need to come with the Bible says this, but also in the world, there's studies showing you your liver, DUIs, car accidents. So home definitely for me.
I guess, Steve, you would say the same thing too, in that sense?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think in our situation, we grew up in largely environments that were mutually reinforcing. Whereas I think sometimes kids can grow up in environments that aren't congruent. So they might learn one thing at home, something else at church, and then something else at school. And that messaging might be very conflicting. I think for us, most of the environments we were in across those 3 domains were like pretty consistent, like reinforcing messaging. But I think the real internal kind of compass was formed at home, not really at church or, in school.
So then, in a sense, I'm hearing you all say that a parent really should send the child to Christian school if they want them to to learn true religion.
How did you hear that?
I didn't hear that.
You didn't hear that?
I definitely did not hear that either.
And what sorry, what what I heard Stephen saying is that the reinforcing across the three platforms, the commonality helped. So it would appear to me then that if the home is seeking to build religious and spiritual foundations, then, and as we already said, a child spends more time away from home in our modern world, then I would think a parent recognizing that would send their child to a Christian school. So that is why I came to that conclusion.
I think that that sounds good, and I think that can be true, but it is often, I shouldn't say often because I don't know the actual statistic, but it is sometimes not true. And in my own experience in different kinds of Christian schools, it could be very variable still, like what that messaging is. But I think, yes, if you would like to teach your children like Christian values, then having them go to a Christian school could definitely be helpful if it's aligned with what you're teaching at home.
So which would you say into trumps which would be the most powerful of these three? Home, school, or church?
I think home would be the most powerful because the parents should be the example for the child in terms of morality and spirituality. So I know in our home we had morning worship, and I guess Stephen is talking about at a certain time in their life when they had to go to school, Christian school, and spend time there, right? That he learned about God and how we should live with others and stuff. But I think most of it was taught from home. And if the early childhood part of a child's life is the most important, then that is what, took the cake.
Well, my first takeaway then for parents listening to this is the fact that if the first part of a child's life, that early childhood, sets the foundation, then sending a child to daycare, you better be careful where that daycare is, what you're learning, the kind of teachers, because it's either going to be reinforcing, as Stephen said, or it's going to be conflicting. And then later on, you will find a child growing up with dissonance between what my parents are telling me, what I'm learning at school, and then I go to church, and it might be another story as well.
And I agree with that because, I mean, even in a child care center, and I'm not really talking about the one I'm teaching in right now, but in any child care center, not all teachers are spiritual, and not all teachers would set the right example for your child. The behavior they may have might not be the right kind of behavior you want your child to portray. So, you really do have to be careful where you send your the school you send your child to, or the child care center you send your child to, and get to know their teachers. So you know exactly what's going on there.
I think with simple communication, that dissonance can be cut down because, first of all, I'm not paying extra money to send my child to Christian school. But if you send your child to a public daycare or public school and they come home, it's a simple, how was your day? Oh, Johnny punched Malik in his face and the teacher said a bad word. And then you talk about why punching people in the face is not okay. You talk about why what the teacher did was wrong and how we choose to live from a Christian or whatever perspective that parent is coming from. So I think it's all about communication. If you don't talk about it, then the child's just going to be like, But if you talk about it and you explain why we as Christians choose not to live like what you saw at school today, I think it definitely helps.
So Sarah, you're saying that home trumps every other platform if it's done right. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I do.
You kind of jumped ahead, but since you talked about communication, let's go to that. How does proper communication skills help parents in teaching their children, and then unpack what we mean by proper communication?
For me, proper communication would mean, well, first of all, age appropriate communication, because what you would explain to a 4-year-old or how you would explain something to, you know, a 14-year-old, it's not going to necessarily be the same. So
Okay.
I think, especially depending on what culture you come from, a lot of us grew up with "because I said so," and a lot of Christian children also grew up with, you know, "because God says so," or "if you do this, you're gonna die," or "if you do this." And so it's kind of scare tactics, and so you don't really understand the process behind why something isn't okay to do. So when you do actually, if you do get involved in that, or you see your friends getting involved in that, and it doesn't seem like anything bad is happening to them, then you feel like, oh, okay, so maybe this isn't really a bad thing to do. So I think communication would be, you know, of course, like I said, up to a certain age, you might just have to say, "because I'm telling you to do it." But then to get into, like Sarah explained earlier, you know, you shouldn't drink because, you know, it can damage your liver, because these reasons or that, you know, that reason, so that they're able to understand the process behind it and build kind of their own reasoning skills as well.
What do you think, Stephen? Unpack what you mean by proper communication, helping a parent in terms of instilling these great qualities, because we're talking about conditioning and educating a child from the home
I
perspective.
think it operates on a lot of levels. I think, to not belabor it, on one level, I think proper communication is obviously, like, you know, speaking, like how do you communicate about different things? How do you talk to a child at not just age appropriate level, but maturity appropriate level? Like, answer honestly to the question they're asking, not what you wish they were asking, or not what you feel comfortable to say. But like, if a child is asking a certain question at a certain level and you do a disservice to their intelligence by not really answering it, they lose trust in you. Because if they're asking you certain things, it's because they already have certain information, or else they wouldn't be asking you the question, right? So
Okay, that's interesting.
so being comfortable to actually meet the child at the level of whatever question they're asking you, because it's coming from some information that they've received
So
in
hold
some.
on, Stephen, hold on. You're saying, I know when Kathy said age appropriate, she meant like maturity appropriate
Yeah.
in this context, but you're saying that the child's question is the barometer of the child's maturity and how to answer. That's what you're saying?
It should be. And I think as you get to know your child, and as Kezi and Sarah's also saying, like, it's about communication. So if I'm not normally talking to you, then when you come to me with a question, my gauge might be off because we haven't had certain conversations. But if I have an open communication with you, when you come, I can kind of gauge, okay, I'll answer a little bit and see what your question is. If you ask me a certain question in return, I know you have certain information, so I can talk to you at that level. And if I don't talk to you at that level, then I know they're not going to really trust what I'm saying. And they're going to, especially in today's age, they're going to find it somewhere else.
Okay.
But I think the second part of that communication that is kind of the more scary part, and the part that we don't think about as much, is everything else that you don't say. So everything you do is communicating, especially with children that are below 7 years old. Their brains are sort of in a state of almost hypnosis, in which everything that they see is written into their
Right.
unconscious in some way that's going to then guide later, you know, things that they will learn from a very conscious place. So I think that aspect of communication is the one really that is easier for parents to miss, but might be even the most important, which is everything else that is not talking to them, but that they still observe and can see, is also communication. So making sure that the things that you say are aligned with what you do, and that you're also honest with them when the things that you say and do don't align, and being real about that dissonance that all humans have to deal with at some point.
Yeah, I think that's important, the things that they hear from you and that they see you doing, because saying something and doing something else, you know, children lose trust in you. So, and you should really communicate with children at an intelligent level, you know, don't down whatever they are saying or asking, you know, talk to them at an intelligent level. And some parents are probably not talkers, but I know when you all were growing up, we had like a family meeting that allow communication. So you mightn't know what your children are thinking, and then you might be too busy to even know what they're thinking. And when they're telling you something, you're too busy to answer or to really listen to what they're saying. But family meetings allow you know, children to open up and talk, and allow you to have that time to answer their questions and to see, you know, what their thoughts are.
Till they became little lawyers, you know, in these family meetings, you know. but again, we always felt that at one point, a child will have to think for himself and go out into the world where we are not there watching, where we are not there, and you'd have to have the ability to analyze what you're seeing and hearing, which is why we had like these family meetings, you know, where you could mount a proper appeal, where we could discuss certain issues. So what we are saying then, communication, parents, is all that we say and don't say, and how we say it. Because if a child comes to you and tells you something, and you open your eyes wide, or you or do something like that, immediately, what are you communicating to that child? Like a girl comes and says, "Dad, I kissed a boy in class today." Now, Steve was telling me, you know, I keep a poker face. He said he keeps a poker face when he's dealing with his children. And even in chaplaincy, they tell us keep a poker face as much as possible, because they're looking at your body language.
They want to know that they're safe to tell you something that they might feel afraid to tell you. It might be, I mean, and sadly, the things that will bring the most guilt and shame are the things they need to talk to you the most. And so having it feel safe to discuss the things that they feel the most unsafe is so important.
I just wanted to say, and I talked to that about this before, like this lady posted once on Facebook about how, you know, she wants to keep open communication with her children, and she knows sometimes it's hard for them to come to her to say things. So in their household, they kind of set up the system where she gave them a little card that says, "I need to talk to you," you know. And so she knows if they give them this, if they put this card on her bed or on her and her husband's bed that says, "I need to talk to you," she knows it's going to be something that either they're ashamed of, something they're scared to tell her. So she goes into it already with the mindset that this is going to be a serious conversation. So they don't have to actually stare at her and say, "Hey, Mom, I need to talk to you." But they know she's coming knowing that they're going to tell her something probably shocking. And she's coming knowing that they're probably going to tell her something shocking. So they're both prepared for the conversation that's going to happen.
Because a lot of times you're caught off guard when a kid tells you something and you don't know how to react, you know, in that moment. So when we talk about communication, what we are simply saying is maturity appropriate. If a 4-year-old child says, "Daddy, what is sex?" there will be a different response than your 11-year-old child asking that same question. At least we expect, unless your 11-year-old child is retarded. Now, on the other hand, all right, okay, politically correct word. But what I'm saying is, you would expect that 11-year-old child to want a more detailed answer, more mature answer than your 4-year-old child. Honesty. You know, I always told our children, I'm going to always be honest with you. And if it's something I'm too embarrassed to talk about, I'll tell you, like, I don't want to talk about it. But I will never lie to you. If I give you an answer, you'll tell us the truth. And I think what Stephen is challenging us as parents is to be honest with children, because they are hearing and they're looking, and it is the non-verbal communication. In fact, somebody once says children learn what they live.
And children live what they learn.
And they live what they learn, right? Mm-hmm. In other words, a child's education is caught as much as it is taught. And sometimes caught more than taught, because a lot of times we tell our children a lot of things and they do the opposite because they're seeing the opposite. So children learn what they live. So proper communication, again, honesty, maturity appropriate, some people say age appropriate, and recognizing that our non-verbal, the tone of our voice, the look on our face, the movement of our hands, all of these are communicating safety or not safe, trust, distrust, and then a child will take their cue from that. Even if we say church is important, but then you're lazy to get up on a Saturday morning, or they never see you taking up your Bible or studying the Sabbath school, they're going to ask themselves the question, is this thing really as serious as mommy or daddy says?
They're not gonna ask the question. They're gonna know.
Which is probably sad too that they probably won't ask, but they'll be having their own ideas in their head.
I was gonna say, as far as church goes, it's a very, like, as far as communication goes in the church, I think that's where my issues began. Because as Stephen was saying, like, as a parent, you want to be very honest and transparent with your child. But I feel like in church, I don't know if it's changing now because I'm older, but back when we were like 10, 11, it was just a lot of like, it's just don't. Like, oh, the sex question. Oh, don't do it. It's bad. But you've been married for 10 years and your child's 14. Like, I can do the math. So what are you telling me, you know? And I feel like that started to cause me to have a lot of distrust for adults in the church, which then like diffused itself through religion as a whole. Like, so if the people in church are not honest with me, then what about religion is honest, you know? So I feel like that's why the home is it for me.
In fact, when you think about it, Adam and Eve trained their children. There was no school, no Garden of Eden middle school, no tree of knowledge of good and evil middle school or anything like that. So everything was Adam and Eve with principal guidance counselor, everything for their children. And in most of antiquity, the home became the place where children learned. Even when we were growing up, Cynthia, back in the day, sometimes your mom didn't go to work.
Right.
And you didn't go to daycare. I mean, in Trinidad, for instance, and those of you who probably come from Africa and some of these countries, we didn't know about daycare and stuff like that. I mean, you stayed home. So the home really became your first school.
Yeah.
But what do you think was the curriculum Adam and Eve were teaching Cain and Abel and the rest of their children? What do you think would be their curriculum? And is it the same kind of curriculum we are dealing with home when we are teaching our children, educating our children?
I'm not sure how long Adam and Eve were out of the garden before she had a Cain, but it would almost seem like a blind leading the blind situation because they didn't grow up necessarily learning. Like, they ended up in a situation where, I don't want to say they were just thrown into it, they put themselves in it, but for the sake of what I'm saying, they were thrown into a world and a life they did not understand. So for them, I'm sure they were also learning as they were going along. So it's like God was instructing them, probably telling them what to say and what to say to their children. So God is instructing them and they're all trying to figure out this life of sin together. And I'm sure probably the most important lesson they were showing their children was why you need to follow God's instructions. It's like, yeah, before this, everything was beautiful. Like, we had a perfect life. We didn't follow God's instructions, and this is what happened. So real life, firsthand example of why we need to follow God's laws. So I'm thinking that was probably the main focus of
Obedience.
Of what they were teaching at obedience.
Okay. Anything else you think of in Adam and Eve's curriculum that they were teaching in their school of outside Eden?
I was gonna say, I don't know what curriculum they were teaching since Cain ended up killing Abel. So I don't know what type of energy Adam and Eve were putting forth, what they were teaching them.
Are you saying that because the fact that Cain killed Abel means that Adam and Eve weren't really teaching them or
That's a parenting thing. I feel like, how do you, I don't know, because it's just so far away. But for Cain to kill Abel, like, I feel like there had to be some type of discrepancy in parenting or something. But as Kes said, they were, I don't know how many were there, since they only talk about Cain, Abel, Adam and Eve. But let's just say it was just them 4 on a planet. They didn't know what to do.
There were more than 4. Definitely, there were more than 4 when Cain killed Abel. We won't go into the theology of it, but by the time Cain killed Abel, there were much more than 4 people on the planet, you know. But still,
argument.
But I guess I think that the teaching was flawed somewhere
why?
along the line, because I'm thinking that even when, you know, sin came into the world, right? And I guess that's why the murder happened and the jealousy and all of that happened, right? The selfishness. even today, you try your best to teach your children about God, about moral values and things like that. But then when they reach a certain age, they make their own choices, right? They make their own choices. So
Right.
I figured that's the same thing that happened with Adam and Eve.
So is it that the teaching was flawed or the learning was flawed?
Both.
Yeah, because sometimes even when we teach our children, we kind of set the wrong example. I remember like an incident in our own family, that and it's not really funny, but so we didn't cook meat at all at home, right? We were all vegetarians, and my sister-in-law invited me to lunch at her home, and she did fish and she cooked. Fish was part of the cooking, and so she insisted that I ate a piece of the fish, and I did eat it. That's like Eve by the tree, right? So I did eat, and so while we were driving back home, Stephen, Sarah, and Kezia, and myself, while we were driving back home, I just wanted to be honest with the children. And so knowing that we didn't eat meat or fish or anything, I told them that I ate a piece of fish. And I remember Stephen got so upset. I didn't expect that, right?
Why?
He was like, why did you do that? Why did you? As though he thought that I would just go to hell right away for eating that piece of fish, right? And I'm like, why did I ever mention it? But I learned a lesson that day too, that what we were teaching, I wasn't following,
All right.
and so that really triggered something in his mind, probably affects him even today.
But again, some of it is, again, when we talk about communication, right? Like, I remember emotionally the incident. I don't remember all the details, but I'm sure at some point, and it might not even have been y'all, it might have been sometime in church or Sabbath school, and I might have been arguing, well, like, why can't we eat fish? They eat fish in the Bible, and someone might have just said, hey, boy, that is a sin. You'll go to hell if you eat fish. And I just internalized that, like, okay, well, I guess the Bible says so we can't eat meat because, like, you go to hell. It's a sin. But again, like, a lot of what happens with these transgenerational curses is that the parents never actually own what they did, right? So in Genesis, we don't get any account of what Adam and Eve ever communicated with Cain and Abel.
Right.
Right? The only communication that happens even up until like Cain dies is God speaking directly to Cain, which shows that regardless of what Adam and Eve were teaching, God had reached out directly to Cain and asked him, hey, like, why are you so angry? So he had an opportunity to have a direct relationship. But I mean, if you're the people that are responsible for the downfall of man, that's a heavy guilt. And I don't know, we have no idea how much they owned up to that or how much of that they actually explained.
I want to suspect that they did. That part of their teaching would have been God, who he was, the creator, how we came here, and why are we on this side of the gate and not on that side? Remember, there was an angel with a sword at the gate. Why is there an angel? Redemption. That God came and he gave a promise, which is why Eve called Cain the begotten, because she thought that this was the fulfillment of the promise that God said your seed would bruise the serpent. So I'm saying I could suspect them telling them about God, about sin and redemption, because he mentioned it, obedience and disobedience. I would even say worship, because the Bible did say that it was in the context of worship that Cain and Abel were angry, that Abel brought a good sacrifice and Cain didn't. So maybe what we are seeing here is not, and there might have been, and by the way, there might have been, it may not have been so much faulty or flawed teaching and flawed learning, that Cain's temperament was rebellious. He could have been angry that they were put out of the garden just for eating the apple. By the way, know that the apple, I said apple, but it's a fruit, so we don't want anyone to go down that road. He might have been angry because they ate the fruit, and why would God do that? So he's bringing his gift in an attitude of rebellion, perhaps. of this is what I'm supposed to do, I'm going to do it. And I must say this though, the Bible leaves out many details for very, very good reason. Because human beings like to get stuck in patterns and predictability. And so if we are told every detail, our minds will lock into those details and think it must be this way, right? And not recognizing that any number of actions could lead to the same results, morally speaking. So by leaving out a lot of details, we are left to fill in the gaps as we see fit that is concordant with what has been revealed. But the very fact that they brought their gifts.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, we don't know how, at least from what I can see, there isn't that much mention after the garden about even the relationship between God and Adam and Eve. Right? Like it mentions more about them procreating and like kind of creating more generations. But once they're kicked out of the garden, obviously the relationship changed.
It did.
I know they're bringing, you know, offerings and stuff like this, but we don't really know, I guess, how that relationship progressed, or, you know, and so, yeah, I think it's hard to really know. But either way, we can see that whatever they were trying to teach, that Cain somehow picked up something, you know, and manifested it.
So we kind of come zeroing down. We have our two more questions that are very significant in this aspect of the family being the first unit of education of a child and one of the key units of education. In other words, what you're saying is parents cannot delegate education simply to church or school. And by the way, homeschooling, is it a hybrid between school and home, or what we're talking about? Is it the same as what we're talking about, this education, or is it a sort of hybrid education of the home, homeschooling?
I mean, the way I view it is that homeschooling is a way of taking the formal education that happens in a traditional school and embedding it within the structure of the home conditioning or home learning system. So all the things that you normally would learn, but then you're also taking the home environment as the context to have all the formal educational things that you would normally get in a school. So I think in the real sense, it should be now more integrated, but now you're just covering all the things that formally are involved in education within the context of the family structure and family life.
Would you say it's a superior learning for the child, homeschooling? In that,
I think it's a more variable learning. So I think it could be superior for sure, but it could also be inferior, and it's very dependent on who the parents are, like how much time they have to invest, what kind of structures they're using, the kids themselves. Like for some children, depending on the structure, it might not work. So I think it can be superior, but it is more variable probably than a traditional school.
I would say that I don't believe that homeschooling should be used as a means of like protecting your children from the outside world, because at some point they are going to have to face the outside world, unless you want them to be like 50 and they still.
Are you suggesting that homeschooling is done to protect the child from the outside world?
I think that there are a lot of parents who homeschool their children to protect them from the outside world, so that they don't get the influence of other children, they don't get the influence of other families. But there is a danger to that, because one, the children don't become socialized, they don't learn to think for themselves or to reason necessarily for themselves. And then at the point where maybe they do go away to college, then now they're forced into a situation or thrown into a situation they were not prepared to face. So
okay,
I don't think it should be a means to like protect your children and isolate them from the outside world, because I even think that interaction with the outside world is a necessary form of education.
So why would a parent take all the effort to homeschool if you're saying that it kind of limits their socialization, their thinking, their critical thinking? Why would a parent go through all that effort to homeschool, Cynthia?
Well, as Kezzy said, to save them from the outside world and the influence of other children, right? But I think homeschooling is a good thing, depending on the parents. But while they're homeschooling, make sure that they get to socialize with other children. And I know some parents who homeschool children do that. They find other parents who are homeschooling, I mean, in their vicinity, and they meet and they go on field trips and they meet in the park and all that. So the child gets to socialize, you know, and definitely they need to improve on their social, emotional influences. So they have to socialize with other children to do that. How will they know if they are resilient? How will they know if they, you know, if they can form good relationships if they don't socialize
If they're
with
just with
other
mommy
children?
and daddy and brother and
Exactly.
sister.
Yeah.
Although, you know, being with brother and sister could be a great socializing tool. In fact, that's why we recommend to people have more than one children, Sarah. You know, because the idea is he's going to grow up with brother or sister and learn to share, you know, learn to, you know, to interact with others, you know, and so we believe that even the home circle could have that socialization, but you're saying you want it to be broad, to be broader.
Of course.
I wanted to say,
and with some people, with some people might say that, you know, you can get that in church, in Sabbath school, children Sabbath school, Pathfinders, you know, and I'm talking about Adventists now, so Pathfinders, Adventurers, and so they can get it in that aspect.
I think you need to be an educated parent if you're going to homeschool. Would that be fair to say? You would have had to at least gone through high school and maybe some college if you want to homeschool, because there's a curriculum that the child has to learn to face the world and to get a job and stuff. You'd have to be a balanced person, consistent, disciplined. I believe homeschooling a child is as much an education for the parent as for the child. That constancy, that discipline, regularity that will allow the child's learning to grow. And
some parents have learned that way. Things that they didn't know, they learned through their own children's education when they homeschool them. And in White did mention that the parents should be educated in different things, sciences and different things, in order to teach their children.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, as far as homeschool goes and socializing with brothers and sisters and people that are in the same circle as you, it doesn't allow, I think, the child to really see different walks of life. Like, you can have two other siblings, but you're going to be more compassionate, more empathetic to them because they're your siblings. So if they take your toy, you just go tell mom and you get it back and it's okay. It's very different when it's someone you don't know. And that was my thing about Christian education in general. If you send them to Adventist elementary school, middle school, high school, like, they don't ever get to see different walks of life because most people share the same values. It may not be like to the T, but most people are sharing the same values. So if you go to a like public college and you meet a Hindu or you meet a Muslim or you see different things that you have never been introduced to, well, it's gonna shock you, and then you're gonna start to, I think it starts to change.
Confused somewhat.
Yeah.
I hear you, because I was thinking you, Stephen and Sarah, Stephen and Kezia have different personalities. And this kind of brings me to this point about train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. I've heard people say things like, I train up my children the same way. And I've got to realize that you can't train up all the children the same way, which is why in this modern world, having more than 3 children becomes challenging. Because are you going to be able to really train up each child in the way he or she should go? Because you had 3 different personalities and attitudes towards life, which would have been a challenge for each one to learn. But I guess I also understand you saying it's one family. You love your brother, you love your sister. It would be different than maybe Tom, nobody living across the street or in your class.
Yes, because I mean, in our same household, we were all taught we don't hit each other, call each other names. So the whole thing is, if we get into something, we all know we're not supposed to hit each other. Someone else may not have learned you're not supposed to hit somebody. So if your only way if the biggest conflict you have in your house is arguing and crying, then you know how to handle that. But what happens when you encounter somebody who didn't learn you're not supposed to hit, and they hit you, then what becomes your response to dealing with conflict outside of what your parents taught you all? This is how you.
All right, I hear you. Good point.
So
how much of that do you need before you learn that lesson?
I mean,
like how much times do you need to be assaulted by a bully, or how much times do you need to be exposed to negative things as a part of your development to say, okay, now you've been exposed to all these bad things, so now you're ready for life. And the only reason I bring that up is just to say, like, there has to be some balance in how you approach it. Because, like, I think people who send their kids to Christian school are often doing it exactly for that reason, I think, to protect them. It has nothing to do with the quality of education. It has to do with, like, we think if they go here, there's certain bad things that they won't be exposed to, certain experiences that they won't have. But those things are definitely real parts of life. And so I think, there is some degree of, like, yes, kids need to experience a lot of different things to get ready for the reality of the world. But there's also an element of, like, what things do they actually need to be exposed to and experience to have within themselves the internal compass to know how to deal with them when they come up.
Yeah, absolutely.
I be kind of come winding down. I'm enjoying this very much. I must say, children, and but we have a time constraint. Jesus was trained mainly by his parents, Mary and Joseph, who themselves weren't really very educated. But then many people in the time of Jesus weren't educated. This was something that was more for the scribes and the Pharisees and the people of the high echelons. But there was some basic learning that every Jewish child would have learned, the scriptures, etc. And it would appear that they did a good job with Jesus. But what aspect of Jesus' training and learning do you think Mary and Joseph missed? Or did they miss anything about Jesus to train Jesus in the way he should go? Do you think they missed something about Jesus? Obviously, they did a good job because he turned out all right, but did they miss something?
So
think about the temple and think about the wedding and stuff.
You already know how I feel about using Jesus as an example for anything. Because he came down for one purpose and one purpose alone. He knew, like, from the moment he came, I truly believe
he was a baby.
I know, but I still feel like he knew his purpose on earth, like early o'clock. So
how early was early o'clock for you?
Probably when he was in the temple, or when he was old enough to understand, like, this is why you're here. Joseph is not really your dad. It's an angel. Like, and so he knew in his mind, like, this is my trajectory. I cannot stray left. I cannot stray right because the world is on my shoulders. But I do think maybe he could have had a little more turbulence in his childhood to prepare him for the road ahead. I feel like he was in a very like, what am I trying to say? Like, his childhood was very safe.
That's what you think? His childhood was safe? His
childhood was very safe.
On what basis do you think it was safe? When Daniel said, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" He grew up in the rough side of town. He grew up in the Southwest DC. No, he grew up in Baltimore.
But the way they make it, well, my interpretation from when I read, granted, he could have been born in Southeast Baltimore, Bronx, but the way he was raised, I feel, was very like, we're trying to protect you, so we're going to make sure you don't walk on this side of town. You don't do this. Yes, he found himself in temple. The mom was looking for him. She was upset. But I feel like he needed a little more turbulence in his life to prepare him for, like, all of the shots he was going to get.
Okay. You kind of count that what Stephen said earlier on about how much exposure that a child need, etc. What do you think, Kezia, Stephen?
I agree with what Sarah's saying. I mean, I don't think he needed it, because the Bible doesn't show that there was ever a difficult situation in his life that he couldn't handle. So I don't think he necessarily needed it in that sense. But then again, like Sarah said, he knew exactly what he came for. And I'm sure from the moment he was born, his mom and his dad were telling him, you're the Messiah, like, you're here for this purpose. And again, we're speculating because the Bible doesn't mention, anything really about his childhood.
That's why I asked the question, actually.
Doesn't mention much, but it's like, I can imagine that his mom really protected him a lot, and like probably didn't want him to go outside and play with the other kids so they wouldn't get corrupted. He was probably like her little shelter child, like how Joseph was to his father.
But did Jesus act sheltered? Do you see any evidence of Jesus' life that he acted as a sheltered child?
There's no evidence that he acted sheltered, but the kind of evidence I see that maybe he was sheltered from her was the fact that she was like Jesus, where were you? Like, why? And even at the wedding, she's like, okay, son, like now is your chance. That her vision was not what his vision
Okay,
was. Like
I'm glad you mentioned
he
that.
saw what he was supposed to be going, and his education was probably mostly coming from whatever internal wisdom he had, a relationship he had with God. And then what she taught him would have helped on the earthly level, but it still showed that she wasn't even on the perfect parenting path for the mission that he had to accomplish.
Well, I know we have to kind of speculate, as you said, because we don't really know. But some people think that Jesus played with friends and he was moving around Nazareth, doing what he had to do. He would have interacted with other people who came in because his dad was Joseph was a carpenter, and so he would have been interacting with people. And the fact, I think he knew at an early age that he was there for a purpose. He came to the earth for a purpose, right? Because even when Mary spoke to him and said, well, why did you leave us? He said, well, don't you know that I was supposed to be about my father's business? And that shows me that he knew exactly that that's the purpose I'm here for, my father's business. And some people might think he was disrespectful to answer his mom like that, but he knew that, and this is why I'm in the temple. I'm about my father's business. So you don't have to fuss about me. And you know this too. You have been teaching me this the whole time, right? So I'm in the temple and I had to be here because that's what that's the purpose I'm here for.
Really quickly before, just mom said something that kind of hit for the first time when she said that Jesus said, don't you know that I have to be about my father's business? Like even the fact that he used the word father there showed me that he was showing that God's level of parenthood was even on a greater level than his earthly parents. The fact that he even used the word father was letting her know, like, I understand you're my mother, but my greater educator is the heavenly Father, not my earthly parents.
I was born for
In other words, we have touched on it, and this is very important for all the parents. The fact that even though Mary and Joseph did a great job with Jesus, his divine nature, his mission, somehow they missed that, which is why he had to remind them in the temple, I must be about my father's business. Which is why when she came to him at the wedding, son, do something. He says, my time isn't yet. In other words, you're not running my agenda. I have another agenda that I have to follow. Not even though I love you, mommy, that is not the agenda I'm here to follow. And I see in that a great lesson. I mean, Cynthia and I did the best we could. And I'm sure there are many parents doing the best they can, but like for Sarah and Steve, man, Kezia, when your time comes, this is a lesson of skills and gifts and temperament. And sometimes we might miss that because we have a sense of what the child should be. Or because we compare one child to another child and expect all our children to go in a certain pathway. Sometimes even the best parents can miss a unique child. Jesus might have appeared rude, as Cynthia said, talk to his mother at 12 years of age. Like Sarah, in that sense. But but you recognize that sometimes a child has to remind a parent, this is my trajectory. I know you brought me into this world, you trained me, you gave me love, and you did all these great things for me, but I have a trajectory I need to follow. And as parents, we need to back off sometimes. Do we recognize the giftedness of our children? I sometimes wonder, did Barack Obama's mother know when he was 8 years that he would be Barack Obama, if you understand what I'm saying? Or Oprah Winfrey's grandmother, did she know she would be Oprah? Even the priest who offered Jesus, did he know this was Jesus, or he just saw another baby? And there are times as parents, we just see, that's my child, don't touch my child. And I recognize that this child may be a unique human being to do something great in the world, or at least not what you think he or she should do. To recognize that and to be able to nurture that in a child, that uniqueness, that sense of who I am, is probably the best thing we can do for children. Kezia.
Oh, I have a question.
Sarah, then, Kezia, you have a point on this before?
It was a question, so Sarah can ask hers since it's probably related to this directly.
It is. So as I said, y'all know how I feel about Jesus as an example. He knew what he was coming for. So my question is, what is the difference between him and Samson? Like, Samson's mom knew, like, don't cut his hair. This is what it's for. And I feel like she tried to parent him in the same exact way that Mary's mom parented Jesus. Was it the size of what he was supposed to be? Like, I'm a Messiah, and Samson, I don't really know what he was put on earth to do, but I just knew the mom knew about his hair and what he had a purpose. Is it the size of the purpose, or was it the parenting, or was it the child?
Very good question, Sarah. And I wish we had more time to really dig into it. But that's a great question, because we see two people whose mothers knew they were special children with a special purpose, with instructions. In fact, Samson's mother will receive in certain instruction. He would be a Nazarite from his birth. Wow. What can happen in cases like that, Sarah, is that a parent becomes overprotective. And they may push this destiny of a child's throat and keep them away from many of the things that they would want to do. So like Samson grew up saying, look, it pleases me well. He wanted to hang out with all the bad boys in town and all the bad girls, you know. So it could be that Samson felt the weight on his shoulder in a way he didn't want to. In other words, I didn't ask for this, you know. Why do I have to be the savior of Israel? All of that could have been happening. His mother could have been very tight with him. So when he got big and he could go out, it's like he broke free, as we know happens to children sometimes who are very sheltered in their early years. They kind of break free when they go to college, and then you can't believe this is the same decent little boy or girl in Sabbath school reciting, you know, for 13 Sabbath, who is doing these things. It's a really good question. And it comes back again to recognizing each child's destiny and uniqueness, respecting it, and not putting pressure on a child as they're growing up, even as you begin to recognize a child's uniqueness. But again, each child has their own choice to make.
And as you said, that only in a home that, you know, we can detect that. Only parents can detect a child's uniqueness, and, you know, that's why we say that education starts in the home. A teacher might not detect that.
With 25
so
kids.
it has to, exactly. So that's why the home is so important in educating the child.
But if mommy and daddy up and down washing here and washing there, getting the master, getting the doctorate, then they can end up in a similar situation.
Exactly.
Yes, yeah.
The question I had was, at what point is there a point where the home stops becoming a source of education? Is it once the child moves away to college, or do the parents continue to play a lifetime role as being educators for their children, no matter how old they get?
Let me ask back that question to you guys. When did we stop becoming your teachers, or are we still your teachers? Do you still see us as your teachers, or are we like those teachers you remember? I remember Miss Gillespie from 3rd grade, and I said, hi, Miss Gillespie, but she's no longer that in your life.
Not for me, definitely. I mean, oh, definitely. To you guys are still my teachers. I still come to ask you a lot of questions, and, you know, I'm sure for a lot of people, when they have their children, their parents kind of help them through the initial stages of parenting and stuff. So at least for us, but I know there's some parents who feel like, oh, you're an adult now, so you figure it out. So I'm wondering if that's biblical, or if that's just
our modern way of doing things.
Yeah.
I feel like those parents that say that are tired of their child not listening when they were in the house. We listen, so y'all are more willing to be like, okay, so here's what. But if we were already not listening when we were living with y'all, be like, all right, you're an adult now, bye.
Do you agree with your sisters?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, I think work and stuff, but that I was gonna make kind of my own mistakes, and that I was gonna do that on my terms, but that had nothing to do with a reflection on how I felt about you all as parents, or, you know, the job that you did. So for me, I think at some point the parents are the primary teachers and mentors and guides. But if the parents actually do a good job, at some point the child begins to develop their own intuition, their own sense of what is right for them. and the parent then becomes sort of like just a wise guide or sage, like someone you go to for advice. It's not necessarily like, I need you to tell me what to do, but it's more someone that can help guide you, say, well, this is how I experience this. These are things to look out for. And you take it and, like you say, eat the meat and throw away the bone. But I think what you find as meat and what you find as bone, evolves as you mature and as you develop your own sense of like how you choose to live.
Last question. Before your mom reads a very beautiful text that I hope you guys will use in your own homes as well, that we tried to use, and every parent listening to this presentation should seek to use. What are the two greatest things a parent can teach their children in this curriculum of the home? What are the two greatest gifts or trainings or things a parent can teach their child?
Well, for me, biblically or just in general?
In general, biblically anyhow, but in general, which would involve biblical principles as well.
So I've been thinking about this for me, about to be a parent, hopefully. Cause and effect.
Okay, cause and effect.
And never settling for what someone tells you, which is very me. Like, you can't just tell me you need to do this or this is what it is. You need to come with facts for me so that I can understand and internalize it for myself, but definitely cause and effect. Like, if you do this
That can happen.
Yes, and it's bigger than you too, because if you do this and that happens, that can now affect someone else, that affects someone else, like butterfly effect. So I think those are honestly the two things that are important to me, because when you think what you do affects other people, will make you think more about what you do.
And the other one?
Yearning for truth. Don't just take what people tell you or what you see online or whatever as truth.
Two good points. Cause and effect and search for truth. Don't just take what people say. Kezia, what do you think?
Are we talking about Christian parents or are we talking about parents in general?
Christian parents, parents in general, Hindu parents, Muslim parents. But since we are Christians, we will apply to us. But we talk about two things any parent in any part of the world, in any religion, could teach a child. And Sarah said, cause and effect, search for truth, and be sure that what you do is because you are convicted. This is true because you found on it, and don't just follow people.
Really, the answer I was going to give is love the Lord and keep his commandments. It sounds cliche, but that would mostly apply to Christian parents. But I think I could say in general too, because there are parents who are not Christians, but based on their morality, if they were Christian, what they would be doing was keeping, the commandments. Like, they live a right life, even though they may not be Christian, if that makes sense. So I think teaching your children like morals and keeping the commandments, doing what's right. Love the Lord, keep his commandments.
Love the Lord and keep his commandments.
Yeah.
Stephen.
I think self-awareness and God awareness, or like spiritual awareness. I think, at least for me, everything else is sort of covered under those two sets of knowledge. And so if you have
awareness and God awareness.
Yeah, for lack of better terminology. But I think anything else that you would teach them, if it's not grounded in that as an experiential baseline, then it's not really gonna be thorough when they try to practice it in real life. But if everything else is grounded on those things, then I think a lot of the trick of life, you won't have to feel like you parent, because you're gonna miss a lot of things. And I think the beauty of that for Jesus, for instance, is that he had those two things. So it didn't matter what things they missed, because he had the two things that he needed the most. So
an awareness of God
and an awareness of him, who he was. Yeah,
who he was, right?
Exactly. And so it's like, if you have those two things, then even the things that a well-meaning parent might miss will be covered under the grace, that comes with that.
Cynthia, can you think of two things you think are the two greatest things a parent could teach a child?
God awareness involving why he placed you on this earth, right? Which is to serve him, to love him, and to understand his will in your life. The other thing is teaching the child, which I guess would be self-awareness, as Stephen said, comes under that. self-control and resilience.
Self-control and resilience.
And teaching by example, which I think is like one of the most important things.
Wow, I thought there was only two great things you could teach your children, but listen to you, I realized I was way off base. So we have, don't take what others say as truth. Find out for yourself, self-determination. That's the word, Sarah. Self-determination. And of course, cause and effect. Everything brings a consequence. Kezia says, fear God, or spiritual values of, it probably comes under God awareness too, you know, and keep his commandments, obedience then, obedience to righteous principles. Stephen says, self-awareness, who are you? What is your unique value as a person? And God awareness. Cynthia echoes that with not only God awareness, but she says resilience, self-control.
Self-control and teaching by example.
And teaching by, and I was thinking self-discipline and perseverance as probably two of the greatest things. When we train a child, when we discipline a child, everything we're doing as parents, even all these other things that we have mentioned, comes under this aspect of self-discipline and perseverance, because becoming great, following God, obeying calls for grittiness. Sometimes you want to fall away. You don't want to get up to do what you got to do, but perseverance says, I'm going to stick it out. Resilience in a sense, I'm going to stick it out. And self-discipline, self-control to defeat the passions of your youth, defeat the bad ways that we all have inherited from our parents. How do I control myself? How do I discipline myself to be and to do what I have to do? I think these are some of the greatest values we can give to children and teach them. That is bigger than sending them to church and teaching them 4 Bible texts. If we could teach them self-awareness, God awareness, wow, how great. And finally, Cynthia, would you read Deuteronomy 6, verse 7 for me, please, for us?
You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up.
Yes. Ultimately, parents never have a day off. Teachers long for summer. They long for all these different holidays and weekends when they can say bye-bye. Parents never have that vacation until, as Stephen said, a child becomes an adult and walks away. And sometimes even when they're adults and walk away, you still continue to be a parent, as a sage, as someone to give counsel. That's so God says the teaching, the education in the home never stops. It happens when you're at the supermarket, if the child sees you put something in the cart and then pay for it, you're educating, It happens when you're cleaning the house. Did you sweep things under the carpet? The child sees that. You never stop. He says, teach them. And some of my greatest lessons that I learned from my father happened outside of church, outside of family worship, outside of a structured environment. Happened while he and I was digging dirt in the background, in the backyard. It happened while we were going to market. It happened in so many casual moments that Daddy would see, a teaching moment. I pray that Sarah, Stephen, Kezia, and every parent listening will be able to recognize these teaching moments that happen all the time. And so parenting never stops. The teaching in the home never stops. Because ultimately, as we have said, perhaps the most fundamental training a child gets, he gets in the home. So Father, teach us how to be truly good teachers of our children, that the home will be a wonderful place of learning, so that when our children become adults, they will not depart from it because they were trained in the way they should go. Through Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, family. Thank you, kids, for coming on. And it was a wonderful time we spent together. I hope the brethren think so as well.
Amen.
Be blessed.